Welcome back to BLOCKTV. It's time now for Links in the Chain. Today, a special guest. I sit down with Dennis C. Vacco. In 1998, he was appointed United States Attorney for the Western District of New York by President Ronald Reagan. He was elected New York State Attorney General in 1994 and served until 1999. And today, he is a partner with law firm Lippis Matthias Wexler Friedman and serves as the firm's Government Investigations and Enforcement Actions Practice Team Leader. He also works in the Cryptocurrency and Digital Assets Practice Team and is uniquely placed to provide insights into the world of US regulation, which it seems so much of our industry hinges on. Dennis, firstly, welcome to BLOCKTV and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here with you.
All right, so Dennis, I want to start by looking back to history a little bit. Now, you sort of came to national attention through a series of prosecutions brought against internet service providers, including Dreamscape Online, for distributing child pornography. We're talking back in the 90s, you were conducting these investigations. Now, you obviously have an experience in history when it comes to internet regulation and being on top of this sort of developmental policy in digital sort of assets and work when it comes to US regulation. What interest do you have specifically when it comes to that sort of world of digital regulation, and how do you think that can impact and shape wider policy in the United States?
Well, so first of all, thank you again for having me, but also for recognizing our initiatives back in the 90s when I was the Attorney General in New York State. This was at a time that the internet was just blowing up on the consumer stage. Unfortunately, in those days, we were still dealing with dial-up service, so the service was very slow. You know, the devices were very large. You didn't have the utility that you have today in iPhones and other cell phone devices. But what we understood at that point in time, and it carries forward now 25 years later, is how the marketplace was evolving. In those days, we were focused on child pornography being trafficked on the internet, but regardless of what the commodity is or whatever the product is, it was clear then, and even clearer now 25 years later, that the marketplace is virtual. It's not just walking up to a supermarket or walking up to a brick and mortar facility anymore, whether it be a bank or a supermarket or a retail outlet. The internet, the worldwide internet, the connectivity across the globe has changed the marketplace. Consequently, regulation needs to change along with the marketplace. I happen to believe, after 20 years in law enforcement, that oftentimes innovation, the marketplace itself, the will of the consumer, whether it's the financial consumer or whatever other product the consumer is engaged in, that it really is the marketplace that ultimately drives regulation. So what happens, and we see it now in the terms of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology, the applications are way ahead of regulation. And that's a bad thing at the beginning. But I do believe over time, regulation, the government will catch up to the marketplace to stabilize it.
But do you think it's a matter of inevitability, or do there need to be actors, and particularly, obviously we'll focus in on the United States, do there need to be actors there that are going to take the initiative and take on the idea of working with cryptocurrencies and other digital assets?
Well, it's funny that you use the phrase actors, because typically in the United States, so where I have the most expertise, oftentimes changes occur, regulatory changes occur, either at the hands of the regulators themselves or on the part of Congress enacting new laws. They usually occur in reaction to the conduct of an actor. Usually the reaction is to unlawful conduct. But what you're suggesting, and I think that it does make sense, that in this instance, the actors, because there isn't a well-defined regulatory scheme, I think when we're talking about cryptocurrency and blockchain, I do believe that legitimate actions, legitimate actors, and the marketplace will help mature government oversight.
So then let's talk about a specific case here. Obviously, the biggest headline of sort of midway through this year, we've seen the announcement by Facebook that of its Libra association and the proposed Libra currency that they're looking to establish. We had those big meetings on Capitol Hill, big congressional hearings about it, but so far, from a regulatory perspective, from a government perspective, a lot of hesitation to move forward with such a project and to allow such a project to go ahead in a regulatory sense. Do you think the US risks getting left behind in a situation like this? Are they fighting the inevitable, or are they making sensible policy and keeping track of new developments?
Well, I think, so I want to break that down into a couple of different categories in terms of the US being left behind. I think that the US is not being left behind in terms of the development of blockchain. I think that utility tokens are something that are being embraced in the United States. I think you see financial institutions, healthcare institutions looking to blockchain technology to help bring a higher level of transparency and certainty to the marketplace and to those products. I think in the crypto world, as opposed to blockchain, I think that the tendency is to be much more reserved and much more cautious, if you will. I mean, look at it, at the end of the day, one of the reasons for that is who issues currency in each nation. It's the sovereign entity.
Right.
So Libra, other forms of cryptocurrency is challenging centuries worth of vantage point that the currency is the province of the sovereign. So I think that cryptocurrency, Libra, and other similar products will lag behind, principally in the United States. I mean, for better or worse, still worldwide, one of the measurements of currency is compared to the US dollar. So there's a lot of vested interest that are economic, regulatory, governmental in protecting the current sovereign control over currency. So when products such as Libra come forward and Bitcoin and other forms of cryptocurrency, it really kind of shakes to the core the concept of the sovereign control over currency.
Certainly, I mean, you've touched on that point there, the sacrosanct nature of the US dollar since the post-World War II order was set up, establishing the dollar as the sort of prime unit of international trade and account. This is something that the US has held onto dearly, perhaps very sensibly, particularly for US policy, to make sure that they keep control of that international trade system, that international financial and monetary policy. But then I look, for example, at China at the moment, which has just announced their release of a central bank digital currency. Not really a true cryptocurrency, but certainly a central bank digital currency. It looks, at least from an outside perspective, like the Chinese are moving ahead in a way where they get to have their cake and eat it too, in terms of keeping that sovereign control, but also moving forward with digital asset technologies. In that instance, could you see the US being left behind? Is China leading the way, and does that risk giving them a first mover advantage?
Well, look, I'm really not an expert on international monetary policy, and I wonder whether or not China's announcement has anything to do with President Trump's trade war with them at this point in time, which, the dollar plays a big role in the trade war. So, but to the extent that it is not just simply a tactic in the ongoing battle between the United States and China over trade and tariffs, et cetera, I do think that, as you said, the Chinese government, the sovereignty, is in a position of trying to have their cake and eat it too. But like so many other things in life and government, I think if it works, and if it makes sense, sooner or later, the United States will have to catch up. I think it's more likely, and I don't mean to be forecasting what's going to happen in Libra, but I think it's more likely that you will see the United States, through its own sovereign control over currency, try to replicate what the Chinese are doing.
All right, so then moving away from the sort of international monetary policy element, let's hone in on domestic cryptocurrency issues in the United States. Now, the US is still, from a private industry perspective, far and away a leader in terms of development, initiatives. So much is still coming out of the US in regards to cryptocurrency and blockchain technology at that private level. But again and time and again, they keep coming up against a lot of issues regarding regulation and compliance inside the United States. It's really holding back a lot of industry players, and we see this time and again on BLOCKTV. Do you think, and do you see that as a problem from your perspective, both in your previous government experience and your current law firm experience?
Well, clearly, I think it's an unsettled area, but I believe that it's an emerging area, it's an emerging piece of the economy that will gain momentum, which is why at my law firm of Lippis Mathias, we started our crypto practice group, and I'm on that group as the leader of the government investigations practice group because there's so many synergies between cryptocurrencies, blockchain development, and government regulations. If I had to put in a phrase the status of the regulatory environment in the United States right now is that it's unsettled. You look at, for instance, the Commodities Future CFTC, Commodities Future Trading Commission. They view cryptocurrency as a commodity, as opposed to down the street, a sister agency, the Security and Exchange Commission, the SEC. It doesn't see it as, they see it as a security instead. So even within the United States government, you have two prominent agencies that look at it through a different lens, and the different lens then impacts the regulatory environment and regulatory control, but most importantly, it creates a lot of confusion in the marketplace. Is it a commodity? Is it a security? The IRS is not coming out and taking a position on either whether it's a commodity or a security, but you can rest assured that the IRS is looking to determine how they can collect taxes through cryptocurrency.
Certainly, I think that's one thing that they'll always make sure they're on top of. But do you think it's, again, just a matter of inevitability that eventually you'll get a cohesive practice once the industry becomes large enough and stable enough and significant?
Yes, and maybe, like an awful lot of things in the United States, it will be what we refer to as the laboratory of the states. So, as you know, we have this wonderful system in the United States where you have the federal government overlay for the 50 states, and then you have individual sovereignties. You have 50 individual sovereignties, and the Supreme Court of the United States has routinely referred to the laboratories of the states, meaning closer to the body politic. Let the states and their legislatures figure it out. So, for instance, in New York State, we have a BIT license in New York State. Okay, so I think that it's quite possible that it won't be the federal government that leads the way to make the regulatory playing field more identifiable and easier to navigate. I think it's just as likely that it can be the states with the federal government catching up.
Well, and speaking of the states, of course, we've got a current ongoing investigation by the New York Attorney General's office regarding the Bitfinex, iFinex, Tether scandal that's going on there, in which there have been sort of an ongoing investigation, accusations put forward of fraudulent activity by those parent companies. I mean, do you think, is that the sort of precedent-setting case that could set the tone for the industry? And do you think that's good for the industry as a whole?
Well, look, at the end of the day, what the New York State Attorney General, the laws that the Attorney General is applying there are just simply good old-fashioned securities fraud statutes. Okay, so there's no new laws that are being employed here. Attorney General James is using the Martin Act. The Martin Act was enacted back in the 20s at the time of the Great Depression, designed to level the marketplace and to ensure that investors have real timely and accurate information about the investments that they're making. So I think those cases are important to the extent that it sends a message to the broader marketplace that slow down, but it's not based upon any new statutes. It's just good old-fashioned the employment of good old-fashioned fraud statutes.
And then I suppose looking from that perspective, though, looking from the corporate, looking from the larger scale government perspective of what signals are being sent, there's a constant narrative that runs through a lot of my interviews here at BLOCKTV and speaking with those inside the crypto sphere, as we like to say, that there is a sort of next wave of interest is going to be that corporate development. It's going to be that institutional level investment within cryptos. Given your work and given your work working in that sort of larger scale in potential corporate world, is that something you're seeing reflected day to day in your working life? Are you seeing those institutions come into play, and are they more willing to because the more regulations are developed?
I think the answer to that is simply yes. So for instance, a very large regional bank in Buffalo, New York, where our law firm is based, M&T Bank. It's principally a Northeast regional bank, but they have just announced a technology hub where they're going to hire over 1,000 technology experts. So I think that the board of directors of that bank, the CFO and chairman of the board, are forward looking. They know that the marketplace in the context of crypto, blockchain is evolving, and they're taking a giant leap forward by creating this technology hub. So I do believe, but again, because banks are typically very cautious because they don't want to get ahead of their regulators, I think that the banks will be cautious. They will be deliberate. But again, the banks have enough power, they have enough clout in the marketplace that they can push the regulatory environment.
So if you were to give, let's say, your last word on the US crypto market as a whole, talking from a sort of private or from a regulatory perspective, positive, negative, where would you say you sort of look to the future when you're considering this developing market?
I think the future is bright. I think it will be, we're in the 21st century, okay? The forms of currency that were used 500 years ago aren't the forms of currency that we're necessarily using today. 1,000 years ago, barter of goods and services was an accepted currency. I believe here in the first 2 decades of the 21st century that the future for blockchain technology, cryptocurrency, the future is bright.
All right, Dennis Vacco, I want to thank you so much for coming to sit with us on BLOCKTV.
Thank you.
All right, and there we have it, a last word on what we think the future seems bright, according to Dennis Vacco, and we appreciate his analysis here at BLOCKTV. Stay with us for more great news, information, and analysis at blocktv.com. I'm Asher Westrop Evans. Thanks for watching.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.